We're delighted to have such an esteemed and diverse set of speakers join us today. We thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us and engage with our audience at the LIF. Today's event will be moderated by Mr. Gaurav Bahirwani. Mr. Bahirwani is founder and CEO at the 116 Network Limited. Before opening the floor to our moderator and panelists, I would like to note a couple of things. We request all our panelists to keep their responses within 5 minutes to ensure that everyone has adequate time to get their points across. We also request for the audience to bear with us if there are any technical difficulties, as this is an online event and there is the possibility of Wi-Fi dropping out at any time. The audience can send in their questions to the Q&A box that you will see. Our team will pick the most relevant questions, and those will be passed on to our panelists to answer during the Q&A session. If you want a question directed at a particular member of the panel, you can make that explicit when you send in the question. Now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to our moderator, Mr. Gaurav Bahirwani.
Thank you, Aman, and good afternoon to all the listeners who've joined us from the UK, including yourself, Manoj, and a very good evening to my panelists and listeners from India. It was this time last year when we saw some countries in the world slowly shutting down. The pandemic was going to leave a mark on every part of the society, and I was wondering, what would happen to sports? And a week later, on the 24th of March, when India shut down, the worry was that we are not going to watch the first match of the IPL, right? And all we could hear about was the virus is going exponential, it's doubling itself, so until some medication, isolation, vaccination, exhaustion happens, the disease would run its course. But could one actually comprehend pleasant things could go exponential too? For example, look at sports entertainment, which has been growing constantly for the last century and booming along with television in the last 70 odd years. Does the human herd at some point become inoculated to games? With everyone as exposed to the happy contagion as possible, until exhaustion emerges. Does the curve finally flatten too? And what could trigger such a subtle shift in habits? The answer actually was the real pandemic. So sports are emerging from the wreckage of a year of disruption not seen in 75 years. With COVID-19 still a threat, uncertainty and frustration prevail. Ayaz, I'm going to start with you and get your opening remarks here. As someone who's been deeply passionate about sports and has been writing about sports for almost 4 decades, March 2020 must have been very tough. The coronavirus almost sounded the final buzzer on all live sporting events. The emotional, social pain that was felt everywhere, especially for the sports fans. Daily news back then was, very hard and heavy, which made craving for the distraction of sports even better, even greater. Through the prism of pandemic, how do you handle the situation? How did you handle the situation, perhaps, and kept your readers and perhaps your followers connected and hopeful? Sorry, I'll have to unmute yourself, Ayaz, sorry.
Yeah. It was tough. I mean, I was in Melbourne for the Women's World Cup final, and we flew back from Cairns. I had taken a short break, and by that time there was talk of a pandemic. So I didn't stop in Singapore, where I was to kind of take a 2-3 day break. Came to Mumbai. The next day, I kind of isolated myself from the family, and I came to Alibag, and here I was stuck for the next 6 months. I couldn't go back. But the point I want to make is this has been unusual. This has been, cathartic. This pandemic, what we have seen. There have been pandemics earlier. There's been the Spanish flu. Yeah. There have been major events where everything else in the world seemed to come to a stop. The World War, for instance. And yet, when you look back, even during the World War, first-class cricket was going on in India. During the Spanish flu time, there were sports activities happening, if not in England, they were happening in Australia or in Asia or somewhere else. This was the only time in living memory or in living history where everything across the world came to a standstill, at least for the first 4 or 5 months. And that was, it was difficult to imagine and even more difficult to live through, because you expect, from the simple act of getting a newspaper in the morning and reading what's happening, or switching on your TV and, switching on to the action, here you are just, you don't know what the hell is going to happen that day, tomorrow, the next month, the next year, maybe. So it's been a year of massive change for all of us in our different ways, but certainly in the area of sports. I mean, look at the players in biosecure bubbles and, fighting not just the fear of the pandemic, but also trying to get out of a situation which they are not acquainted with at all. Absolutely. Sports, sports persons are performing artists. They thrive on people being at the stadiums or stadia. And here there is nobody. So I mean, all kinds of challenges have come up in our own ways. We've tried to cope up with it. I think that at the end of the day, the resilience and the survival instinct of the human race prevails, and that's the happy note I would like to end this question on.
Thank you, Ayaz. Sanjog, let me get your thoughts from a broadcasting. Cancellations and postponements of major sports events must have been very tough, especially for broadcaster like Star Sports, which is almost synonymous to sports in our country, right? And all thanks to your outstanding production quality and content that the channel offers. I'm always hooked onto it, as you know. But I'm sure somewhere it was very clear that with people trapped at homes, the consumption of media, be it television or digital, was going to witness an explosion. I remember Doordarshan decided to unleash the power of nostalgia by rebroadcasting some of the greatest programs that they had in the past. And to be honest, despite of watching Ramayana with such bad animation of, those slow flying arrows and tacky sets, it did not dim selective ardor of our people, right? I'm sure you would have liked to capitalize this spike in media consumption by finding some new ways to engage with your consumers when there was actually no sports happening. So, how did you manage the situation?
It's interesting, Gaurav. Ayaz spoke of what he went through when the country shut down. We were in an interesting situation where we had a crew actually in Lucknow when the country started to shut down and the impact of the pandemic started getting felt. So our first priority was to just make sure everyone reaches home safe, right? We just wanted all of our crew, players, and I think the BCCI took a bold call to cancel the series at that point and take a decision that perhaps was needed to be taken, but you needed to have gumption and a lot of conviction to take that decision. And I think at that point, to call off that India-South Africa series and have the players, the crew, and everyone else involved in the series return home safe was fundamentally the first thing that needed to be done. After that, I think it took us some time to just understand what was happening. The kind of ambiguity that we saw, as Ayaz spoke earlier, we've never seen before. The conjecture around whether the IPL will happen, then of course the cancellation of IPL, the postponement of IPL, the indefinite postponement of IPL, meant that we were suddenly thrown into this situation where there were no live events. And you of all people know, a sports broadcaster thrives and survives on live events. And suddenly we had a situation where there were no live events whatsoever. It presented a unique challenge, as you said, but I think as we accepted the fact that this is what life was going to be like, at least in the near term, we also started acknowledging the fact that we needed to serve the sports fan who was still longing for sport, right? And there is something deeply communal and uplifting about sport, which no other form of entertainment can offer. So you spoke of Ramayana and you spoke of other modes of passive entertainment that entertain you, but they don't engage you the same way that sport does. And which is why it became contingent upon us to really serve the sports fan in a way that would still conjure some of those feelings, emotions of celebration, nostalgia, and that feeling of community that only sport can deliver. And there were two big pushes for us before, of course, live sport resumed with the Premier League on our network. One was to bring this community together, and we launched a couple of new shows which were oriented towards connecting with fans and connecting fans with each other and connecting fans with their favorite athletes who were now sitting at home and had all the time in the world to connect with them, right? So I remember this one show that we did with 25 kids from all over the world interviewing Virat Kohli. And it was in my opinion, one of the best shows that we've done in a while. We created a stream of content which was all about interacting with each other as fans and interacting with some of your heroes, some of your icons, and basically creating this sense of community around this, around this feeling of togetherness that only sport can deliver. The other thing which we actually took the learning from, as you said, Ramayana and Mahabharata, was to relive memories of sport that a very large community of fans have shared together. So we celebrated World Cup 2011. In fact, we conceptualized something called Relive, which was basically an attempt at rebroadcasting some of the greatest games across sports that fans have shared memories of, and getting some of the athletes and the players and the commentators who were actually involved in the game or connected with those games in some way to actually relive those memories. And those games created immense traction, because suddenly you had the World Cup final or the T20 World Cup final from 2007 being relived by Irfan Pathan, Yusuf Pathan, Gautam Gambhir and Robin Uttappa. And they were sharing memories of that game, which perhaps no one had heard of till now. So I think both in terms of engaging fans by creating this sense of togetherness and community, and on the other side, really trying to fill the void that the absence of live sport had created in our lives by at least offering memories of live sport, were the two big areas that enabled us to stay connected with sports fans. And the interesting thing is, and this is just a number that I'm throwing out there, you would have thought that subscribers of sports channels, especially, and I can speak of Star Sports, would unsubscribe during this period because there were no live events. We actually didn't lose subscribers at all. The loss was minimal. It was in the range of 7 to 10%, which we quickly regained as soon as live sport resumed. In fact, by the time IPL started, we were at higher numbers than we were in March 2020. And that's the love for sport that fans have.
So, during the pandemic, when you created these unique pieces of content, do you think that it actually allowed you to start thinking outside the box and create, you could actually create this content when things go normal and actually fill up the channel when, when there's no live sport happening at that point of time? Is this something that you could actually carry on and as a learning from the pandemic?
Absolutely, Gaurav. You've hit the nail on the head. I think the two things, and I don't mean to sound insensitive, the pandemic did exact a heavy toll on all of us, right? And the world at large. But I think what the pandemic also did is forced us to reimagine the way that we did things, which includes how do we engage with fans and how do we do the things that we do to engage with fans. And that was a big part of this. And the second thing that it did was it acted as an accelerant for trends that had begun to emerge before the pandemic. And it has probably carried us, or the last year has seen those trends, almost play out in 12 months the way that they would have played out over 3 to 5 years, especially in the areas of adoption of technology and fan engagement again. And I think on both counts, we will now no longer go back to what normal looked like in 2020 before the pandemic. It is not just a new normal, it's almost given us a push to reimagine the way sports broadcast and fan engagement with sports is and is going to be.
Sure. Thank you, Sanjog. Manoj, I'll come to you now. I'll just quote somebody that you perhaps would know. Neville Cardus, the longtime Guardian writer, he famously once said, there can be no summer in this land without cricket. To extend this quote, we can all agree that, it's not just summer, but in India, no season can actually happen without cricket, right? So when England hosted the bilateral series in July last year, it marked the comeback of cricket in some way, although with obviously no in-stadium attendance. IPL was going to be a different animal altogether. 300 people in a bio bubble for 80 days, and it could just take one person to get infected, and it could just spread like wildfire. It happened, I think, initially with the CSK team. As the lead owner of Rajasthan Royals franchisee, the postponement of the IPL from March 2020 to playing your first game in September must have not been a very easy journey. There's definitely losses of revenue, but at the same time, it must be very tough to keep the morale of the players intact. Keeping your team sponsors hopeful. How did you handle that?
Thank you, Gaurav. And hello to everyone from LSE and the group that are there. Actually, I don't think it was particularly challenging. I think we've got to keep a little bit of perspective here, which is we're talking about one of the most existential crises that the world has ever faced. And frankly, the postponement of a sporting tournament or the lack of access to sporting events, these are relatively trivial events in the context of what's gone on in the world. I mean, I think, there are much more serious topics to discuss about the impact of COVID than the IPL getting delayed. And the way I characterize the year was, I think it was sort of a game of 3/3, where the first third, it was important just to keep everyone, whether it was your sponsors, whether it was your team, whether it was your employees, aware that just keeping things in perspective, which is, this is sport. It's a shame it's been delayed, but there are some much bigger things going on in the world right now. The second third was when we started to understand what the pandemic actually meant and what threat it actually posed to 85% of the population, i.e. not much. Then I think we were allowed to start missing sport. And I remember that second third feeling a yearning for sport and an appreciation for sport and lots of people saying to me, gosh, I didn't realize how important sport was to my calendar, to my life, to my, and it was okay to talk about it for the second third of the year. And then the third third of the year, we saw, whether it was the response of people like Star or the broadcasters or the response of the tournament organizers, everyone just got on with it. And Sanjog said something very important, and which is that actually what we saw was an acceleration of a transformation in fan engagement, in the role of digital, in the way we consume sport. That's been a long time coming. And all that happened really was we saw 5 years progress made in the last third. But I think the most important thing for me about last year was we all learned, how important sport is economically, because for the first time we had to have conversations about the economics of sport. I mean, the number of people that came up to me and said, God, I didn't realize, cricket's a $2 billion industry. I didn't realize the IPL was a third of, so people were talking about the economics of sport in a way they'd never talked about. And I think sportsmen, sports owners, and to some extent sports administrators also started to understand the importance of sport to society and the responsibility that sport has to society. So, when you look at what impact the English Premier League had on the Black Lives Matter movement, the reaction to George Floyd, and I think, by the way, we've got a long way to go on that in the IPL. I mean, we have an extraordinary privilege. Frankly, having the tournament delayed by a few months, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an apology. That's a tiny, tiny issue. The fact we were able to play a tournament was a privilege. The fact that we have the largest media and advertising platform in India is a privilege. And we have to use that privilege, not just for commercial gain, but also to continue India's transformation and continue society's transformation.
Thank you, Manoj. Abhinav, I'll come to you now. Entering 2020, the year of the highly anticipated Summer Olympics, life in the sports world almost looked as bright as it ever could be. And then we know how the story ended, right? With March 2020 rolled out, the sports industry as well as the world, went into this chaos overnight. And, of course, Olympics was postponed. Now, no one can understand the excitement coupled with pressure in the minds of athletes preparing for the Olympics better than you. You've seen failures, you've experienced glory. But the postponement of the Tokyo Olympics last year was traumatic for both athletes and the sports fans worldwide. And in fact, we have seen Olympics being cancelled in the past. When in the 1940 Tokyo Olympics was of course cancelled at the onset of the World War II. We had the H1N1 influenza pandemic around the Vancouver 2010 Olympics. We had the Zika virus issue at the Rio 2016. So this is the first time in almost a century where there's been a postponement due to a medical issue. As a former athlete and India's first Olympic gold medalist, what do you feel would have been the impact on the mental health and perhaps the mindset of the athletes across India due to this particular postponement? Would that have a bearing on their performance later this year in Japan?
Well, firstly, I think the world faced mental health issues and athletes are not isolated to that. I think it really helped break down the stigma attached to mental health, specifically for athletes to a great degree, because people all around the world themselves experience some degree of symptoms. I think it was a tough time. I think it was a tough time for athletes, specifically who prepare in a cycle and have planned their peak cycles in a certain way and have trained in a certain way. But having said that, I think the athlete population is probably the most resilient population that I know of, and we continuously learn to adapt in our sports career on a day-to-day basis, and this was a challenge faced, and we've had to adapt. And I think the good thing was, at least in the Olympic world, sport did resume in September of 2020. In the Olympic sports, we've seen close to 270 events at the World Cup and World Championship levels from September of 2020. 30,000 athletes have taken part in it. They've managed to do it in a safe way. They've had to have maybe more than 200,000 COVID tests. But besides that, we've managed to hold these events without any of them becoming a super spreader event of sorts. And that gives us a lot of hope. That gives us a lot of hope that the games will happen in some way, some shape or form in July this year. It was a tough period, but athletes have found a way to get going. Athletes generally, have busy bodies, and I think just being locked down initially was tough physically, but I think also the mental impact was certainly there. But again, it's a question of adaptability, and I think you also I appreciate the point that Manoj made that sport is trivial in the larger scheme of things, and we also have a positive role to play to society and a responsible role that we have to play to society. And I think the postponement of the games at that time was the appropriate thing to do. But now we're looking forward to it. We've seen all these events happening without access to a vaccine. Now that the vaccine rollout is already there, so we're very hopeful that the games will happen. The athletes have probably already adapted and are looking forward to performing in Tokyo.
Thank you, Abhinav. Sanjog, I'll come back to you. I'm just carrying on from the point that Abhinav also made. And I'd like to get your views on this in a few minutes too. Firstly, Sanjog, let me congratulate on the way you guys pulled off the IPL broadcasting. I think it was radically different from the glorious exuberance we are all used to watching, anticipating, the sunshine and the exquisite backdrop of fans and supporters. But the excitement for all of us was so high that, after the first couple of days, our eyes barely managed to catch the glimpse of the empty stadiums there. I've personally met you at Star Sports office several times, and there's always been this great buzz on the floor where you are, with commentators and presenters walking up and down the lobby. I'm sure the experience in September was perhaps very different. What was going on behind the scenes, and any key learnings that you could take to the next IPL that's coming forward?
Okay, it was quite a journey, so I'll try and focus on 2 or 3 things. Firstly, I think just to pull off the IPL itself was, at one point seemed like a Herculean task. There were close to 700 odd crew members in various biosecure bubbles across 2 countries, across UAE and India, which is a sizable number to manage for anything between 75 to 90 days. To put it all together at a time when the situation with the pandemic was anything but under control was itself quite a challenge. And I think it's interesting what Manoj said, and I'll just combine it with what Abhinav said as well. While sport is perhaps trivial in the larger scheme of things, and obviously there is longing for sport cannot even compare with what the country and what the world was going through, and it's perhaps the least of people's concerns. I think we believe we were driven by the purpose of bringing smiles to people's faces. And I think a country that had been ravaged as badly as India had been by the pandemic almost needed the IPL to just bring a little bit of joy to people's evenings. And Manoj has seen this, he's been a part of IPL, as long as anyone else. There is something about that tournament which, for those 50, 55 days, brings immense joy and satisfaction to people's lives. And I think after dealing with the pandemic for almost 6 months. India needed that. So I think while in the context of the suffering and everything that the nation and the world had gone through, a sporting event seems very small or trivial. For the mood of the nation, if I can be a little, maybe I'm making too much of this, but I think for the mood of the nation, it was important for that event to come together. And I think the first challenge for us was exactly what Manoj said, which is how do you announce the IPL while seeming responsible and sensitive to what the country had been through. And IPL couldn't be projected, presented and marketed the same way that all previous editions of IPL had been. You couldn't be seen to be celebrating in the midst of everything that was happening in this country. And which is why I think the first challenge for us was to come up with a way of presenting IPL which would be sensitive and yet not seem a watered down version of the IPL. And that started with the first communication that we put out, right? So our entire thrust of IPL was about togetherness. The campaign line was Ek Saath Wali Baat, because the one thing we felt people had truly missed in the last 6 months was social contact, right? And here was an opportunity without, breaking the norms of social distancing. You could be physically distanced, but feel like you were a part of something bigger and feel a sense of togetherness. And I think that for us was the first real challenge. And the big learning was exactly what Manoj said, that there is a context in which sport operates, and there is a context in which even a tournament as big as IPL operates. And it's contingent upon all stakeholders to come together and push forth with a higher purpose for having the event, but at the same time be sensitive to what the context was. I think that was one. The second was, as I mentioned earlier, just the logistical challenge of mounting this event across 3 venues in the UAE, a massive production that happens, production and broadcast that happens in Mumbai, and making sure each and every member of the team goes home well, both in terms of physical health as well as mental wellness. Yeah. So, a lot is said, and rightly so, about players' mental health, but it exacts a heavy toll on the mental health of all those who are involved behind the scenes, because they're living inside biosecure bubbles as well. And they're perhaps not even operating with the same level of limited freedom that athletes are accorded. And thus, it was important for us to make sure that the entire operation was seen to be safe, was actually safe, and everyone returned home feeling well. The last point that I'll make is, and Manoj spoke of this, is just, I think what the IPL in the way that it was being staged forced us to do is to reimagine each and every aspect of fan engagement, right from what the sounds of the stadium should be, given that you have no sound in the stadium other than the ball hitting the bat and perhaps some sounds emanating from the field of play, forced us to reimagine what the broadcast would seem like, or what it should be like. It forced us to bring cheers of fans who were at home watching the games on their screens to the stadium, using emojis that fans were using on the OTT platform. So I think what it did and what will stay with us is the fact that at the center of, or at the very heart of sport is the fan. And the more that we focus on fans, not just in stadia, but everywhere that they are, the more enriching the sporting experience can be, and the bigger our sport can get.
Ayaz, do you believe the successful execution of the IPL struck a chord with the global sports industry at large and brought a huge amount of confidence that perhaps sports is going to be back in full swing?
Well, I think it was very masterfully done. I think there was such a huge longing and a craving for live action. Just to get out of your despondent state, people wanted to see some live action happening. Yes, there were limitations, no live audiences, etc., etc. I thought that to take the situation of the pandemic and transform it into, for the spectators, for the consumers, as something, hey, we are all in it together. We know that there is something which is going on, which is not palatable, which is not to anybody's liking. But here's something that can offer some respite. I think that's something that, Sanjog has mentioned. That was the underlying kind of theme, if I may say so. But I think also that, by then, slowly, at least in cricket, there was more action happening. It started to happen in England. Then, Australia went to England for a white ball series, and then Australian domestic cricket started. India was, of course, languishing in terms of cricket engagements, even in domestic cricket. So for IPL to come, and I want to make this point, it's not just that the Indian Cricket Board or the broadcasters or the fans or the writers who all wanted the IPL because it gives us vocation, occupation, livelihood, engagement in whichever way. The entire cricket world actually wanted the IPL to be held. I mean, look, it meant, delaying the World T20 by a year. And forsaking that to play the IPL, it's not only because, yes, BCCI is rich and powerful, etc. It can twist arms and all that. But look at the responses that one got from other boards. I think everybody wanted to see, and the players.
Yeah.
So I think that the position or the value proposition of the IPL came out very strongly in that whole 4, 5, 6 week period when it was going back and forth whether it should be held or not, should not be held. And I think that it's not a matter of cricket politics or arm twisting and just power politics, power play, but I think also to understand what this value proposition is and how therefore it must be safeguarded in future. Tomorrow it might not be a pandemic, but there may be other issues which could be a threat. Yeah. To me, it's very valuable. The value proposition needs to be protected across all kinds of threats.
Yeah, thanks, Ayaz. Manoj, I'll come to you. I just want a perspective on something. So specifically to your team. So, just to go back, Rajasthan Royal wins the inaugural edition of the IPL in 2008. 16-17 was a tough year for you guys. 2020, you started off well. It didn't end well. 2021, the team composition looks very interesting. You released 8 players, including Steve Smith, and announced Sanju Samson as your captain. And of course, the question that I'm not going to ask you is, why was Chris Morris bought at that price? Because I'm sure you've asked that question 100 million times now. What I want to ask you is that as the owner of the RR franchisee, I'm sure you have your moments with the team in the dressing room, encouraging and motivating them when the games are on. Shahrukh, for example, is very animated with KKR, right? Besides the business side, and I don't think a lot of people have asked this question, do owners feel the pressure of winning as much as the players do? I mean, what will it take for RR to repeat the glory of 2008?
It's a very good question. I've been waiting for 13 years and we still haven't done it. I think I've clung on to that inaugural winners tag. So as long as I can keep clinging on to it, I don't mind. Look, firstly, but just to be clear, I've never been in the dressing room and I have no ambition to ever go in the dressing room. I think there's a very clear line in sports ownership, or there's a very clear line that served me well, which is the sport is about the athletes, and the sport is in the case of the IPL, the sport's about the cricket. The sport for me has never ever been about the owners, and the only reason I've had to come to the fore visibly as an owner is because of the controversies that we've had associated with some of our other owners. So that's the honest reality. I'd rather be unknown as the lead owner of the Rajasthan Royals, because for me, the sport, the cricket has always been the first and foremost focus. And, my advice to other owners has always been the dressing room should be the sanctity of the coaches and the athletes. Now, that isn't necessarily the view of other owners, but that's their prerogative. So to answer your question, of course, I want to win. I mean, I'm a businessman. I'm a competitive individual. I'm a amateur, pathetic, poor sportsman who, like all of us had dreams to be like Abhinav. But the reality is, of course, I want to win. Of course, I feel the pressure. It's embarrassing when you have to see your colleagues in board meetings and see your friends and they go, what's happening? You've got Joss Butler and you're at your bottom of the table. So, that's the one thing that's different about sports ownership versus any other form of business is everyone has an opinion. Everything you do is highly visible. and you therefore have to put up with an awful lot of comments and pokes, which running other businesses doesn't. But, I come back to, it's a massive privilege. So if you're not prepared to take a few of the bullets and take a few of the embarrassment, then, you've also got to acknowledge that there's a huge number of benefits that come with sports ownership, and a huge responsibility. And I come back to the point I was making in my previous answer was not the sport is trivial. My comment about trivial was that for the first 4 months of the pandemic, the choices and the suffering that sportsmen and sports athletes and sports owners had to make was trivial then. What we learned through the pandemic is how powerful sport is, and what we have to do as sports owners, sports regulators, and sports people is use our platforms for more than just making money and for more than just commercial success, and recognize the ability we have to transform society using sport. And that's the journey, and that's the sermon that I want to preach for the next 4 to 5 years, because there's more money coming into sport, there's more investment coming into sport than ever before, and that just makes the responsibility and the opportunity even bigger.
Thank you. Abhinav, let me just move the conversation back to Olympics. One of the early consequences of the COVID-19 outbreak for global sports was the suspension of the anti-doping testing that happened. I think it started off in China first in February. And the reasons for this was very obvious. They just didn't want people to sort of get physically close. The testing protocol was clearly problematic during the COVID-19 outbreak, as it sort of involved the risk of being, catching or perhaps catching the virus. Then WADA eventually issued guidelines on at least some testing in safety. Although the consequences were obvious, there is one good reason to fear that some athletes who would have unfortunately taken advantage of the pandemic-induced gaps in the anti-doping system. That's one side of the story. And even though if it's actually not true, we will fully never know the extent to which these violations were there. On the other side, people who were actually suspended. If you look at the postponement, perhaps by the time the Olympics happen now, it will be the end of their doping suspensions, right? So they will perhaps come back to compete in those competitions. Both the situations raise a question regarding whether there should be some sort of response, and if so, what that response would be. Would you like to comment on this?
Well, I think initially, of course, doping tests were totally suspended. Firstly, the in-competition tests were not happening because there were no competitions, but I think we really focused on the out-of-competition testing. But that did come back pretty soon, and I think the strategy really changed to more strategic testing happening with a lot of intelligence gathering and things like that. Of course, not an ideal situation, but it's about adaptability again. You do know that all the samples which are taken at the games or at other events of a certain level are kept in storage for 10 years. So they do get retested with technological advancements coming into play, with biological passports that are available. There are ways to catch the cheats, and I think I just hope that athletes commit to clean sport, because those are the values that that's the real value of sport, to have fair competition. But of course, it is a difficult scenario, and I think there was no ideal solution to the issue. It was about finding the best possible solution in the circumstances, and that's what I think WADA eventually did do. As regards to athletes who were suspended and now again will have a chance to compete at the games, these are small number, but the number is there. I think there are always two sides to it. They did not bring the pandemic on, and they served their sentence, so be it. Again, a very difficult situation, and has legal consequences, and it's a legal case. So I think one has to be bound by the rules, and the rules really govern what is happening and what the possibilities are for such individuals and athletes.
Thank you, Abhinav. Ayaz, you were born in a country where cricket is not yet very popular, right? You read economics and law at Bombay University, and your father wanted you to become a lawyer, but you followed your passion. So in 4 decades, you've witnessed the dominance of sports as a career choice. Perhaps more on the playing side. Normally sports commentators generally come in, after playing the respective game in their lives. And very few non-cricketers like yourself, Harsha, Boria, for example, are powerful voices in the sports industry in India. With IPL opening up the slate for global commentators, I'm sure Sanjog is spoiled for choice, right, with commentators. But when it comes to sports journalism, barring a few names, including yourself, we don't hear much about, other people. Is sports journalism being taken seriously as a career choice?
Well, actually, it is. I mean, surprisingly, in fact, what has happened, there's been an explosion in sports writing. Largely because the digital platform has opened up. So while it's chaotic, it's confounding at times. There's all kinds of voices there. Some of it may sound like gibberish, but there's some very exciting young voices. I think that's welcome. It's how you sift through and who you want to, how they reach out to the consumers and listeners and readers reach out to them, or viewers, is really the challenge now, because there's we're living in the information age. There's an explosion of how much is being produced now in terms of what we call broadly content. So it's not easy to navigate. But I think that the challenge for journalists, and I'm saying this for whether it's television or voice or print or whatever else, the challenge is twofold. One is to obviously focus on quality and deliver quality which is appreciated by the audience, and then is perhaps an equally important challenge, or maybe a bigger challenge, is to find a platform which reflects or propagates what you are saying, because finding that has become difficult. Look at it from a newspaper's point of view. A newspaper might have 10, 12, 15 journalists, but now there are hundreds of people writing. And how do they reach out to the audiences? That's become a bit of a challenge. But I think, hey, I'm still in the game. So
Sanjog, you could jump in here and tell us your experience of working with commentators and presenters. For example, do you see opportunities for non-cricketing talent coming in as commentators in the future? That's my first question. Is there a method or process that is in place currently in Star to identify that new talent and train them? Because perhaps it's going to get more difficult when we start talking about the regional channels, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think the field has opened up like never before. Both for former sports persons and for non-sports persons.
Yeah.
I think the first thing, a number that I can throw at you is IPL in 2019, when we were working without COVID constraints, saw as many as 110 commentators being employed across all the feeds that were produced, and a mix of former cricketers and non-athletes. And I think what's happened with cricket now being made available in multiple languages and actually being broadcast with regional feeds is that it's opened up the opportunity to a lot of former cricketers as almost a second wind in their careers. But what it has also done is that it has brought in a lot of new talent that has a strong view on cricket. These are great storytellers, and these are great storytellers in Tamil. We have a couple of commentators who were RJs earlier, RJ Balaji and RJ Muthu, who are extremely popular now in Tamil Nadu on the Tamil feed. In fact, their following in Tamil Nadu compares with the following of the likes of Ravi Shastri and Harsha Bhogle at a national level. Ravi Shastri, the commentator, not so much the coach. And I think what's happening in sport in general, now that we have both football and kabaddi, the two sports that at least we have professional leagues being broadcast on the channel, is that we've seen both former football players and also storytellers who've been either picked out for their ability to tell stories or for their ability to tell sporting stories and being groomed for broadcast. And the typical process that we follow is, obviously there is a scouting process of finding storytellers, either great storytellers who we believe are passionate about sport and can be groomed to tell to build narratives of sport, or former sports persons who have the potential to be great storytellers who need grooming on storytelling. And typically the process that we would follow is no different than the process of training and development that would be followed to groom young athletes, right? Including putting them through the paces, doing dry runs, putting them in live situations, running a lot of simulations. And a lot of that goes into the making of a commentator when he or she, for that matter, is now going to be a part of a professional broadcast, the likes of an IPL or PKL or ISL. So I think the field is opening up. I think commentary, storytelling, presentation are professions that are only going to grow as sports broadcasts in the country grow, and as we have more and more feeds attached with each broadcast that we do.
Yeah. Manoj, you've got the Rajasthan Royals Academy where you're grooming young talent under the mentorship of players and handpicked coaches. RR is also very well known for its innovation, especially when it comes to high performance. Now, I saw a video, I remember, with RR's adoption of the straight bat technology, the sensor on the bat during the RR camps. Will it be safe to say that the alumni of RR Academy will be equipped with the latest know-hows and technologies when they build their career in professional cricket?
Yeah, look, innovation is always, I mean, it's partly, my day job for 23 years has been building technology companies. And so innovation has always been something that's at the core of what we do. I believe for 20 years, not for the last 12 months, that technology is going to transform sport at lots of different levels. And sport is about getting an edge. And so you seek to get an edge wherever you can. We're never going to get an edge by spending the most. There are some people in the IPL with much bigger wallets than me. We're never going to get an edge by having the biggest fan base. And so we're unlikely to win the economic battle. So we have to win, we have to try and compete differently. And innovation and unearthing young players has been the strategy that we've chosen. And sometimes it's worked for us, sometimes it hasn't. But so yes, look, it's, I hope that we continue with that. I think every league needs an innovative team. We try to be that team. We've invested heavily in our private academy down in Nagpur. We have 8 academies around the world. We have an awful lot of young kids, boys and girls. We were the first IPL team to have a girls team and a women's team. I think women's sport has got a huge role to play in innovation. And just going back to the previous question, I think what is really interesting around sport right now is that we are attracting talent from outside of sport. So yes. I believe that within 5 years, we will have a first-class cricket coach that didn't play the game, or certainly that didn't play the game at the highest level. I think there's an assumption in sport that great players become great coaches. And if you look at cricket, that's definitely where we are at today. But I think with the level of access to performance stats, to information, to data, you're going to see a different type of coaching professional emerge. I think sports as an industry suffers from the fact that it actually draws from a relatively narrow talent pool. And I think that talent pool is broadening. When I look at the sorts of people that apply to jobs like being the CFO of the Rajasthan Royals or being the CMO of the Rajasthan Royals, I can now compete with a Unilever or a Procter & Gamble or a Star, whereas 10 years ago, the talent pool that would come and work in a sporting franchise were basically people who either weren't good enough to become elite athletes themselves but loved the sport, or people that were able to convince their parents that being a doctor or an engineer wasn't the be all and end all. So I think the talent pool for sport is growing massively, and I think that's great for industries because economics are one thing, but talent's another.
I'd just like to add a point that Manoj touched upon. I think the other thing that we are seeing with the expansion of talent pool is also the diversity. I remember going for a game in 2013 as a new crew member, and in a crew of 140 odd crew members, there was one woman, and this is an actual crew, right, which was producing a game. And from 2013 and Ayaz has been a part of this journey. Ayaz knows this. Some of our best producers who've actually produced him have been women. Right? Yeah. Our decision to have a woman as the fronting face of our coverage in the World Cup in 2015 was testament to the movement that we've seen. So, a part of what Manoj was rightly referring to, and I must give credit to Rajasthan Royals where it's due for the work that they've done to bring more girls into cricket, and also continuing to invest both in terms of monies, but also in terms of effort and bandwidth in women's cricket at the grassroots level as well as at the semi-professional level. And we are seeing fruits of that labor come through both on the field in the performance of the Indian women's team, or for that matter, just the sheer quality of cricket that the Indian women now play, but also off the field, right? In behind the scenes, and just the sheer level of interest that women now have in being a part of our industry, which, to my mind, and Manoj may know better, I hadn't seen this as late as 2013.
So, Gaurav, can I just jump in quickly for a brief thing here? I think this is a fantastic dimension which is coming to not just sport in India, but in Indian society, and I think that's really important. But let me restrict it to sports. I have always maintained this, that you cannot become a sporting nation if you keep 50% of your population out of sports, which is women. And it's absolutely, and what Sanjog said is right. I mean, the women who were producers or whatever else they were in the crew, they were not lagging behind in expertise or in knowledge. Perhaps they even had a better feel or a different feel for sport, which added value to the end consumer. And I think that's become really important. I feel that if this is my plea here. It's beyond what we are discussing. I just want to make this plea here. If you keep the girl child out of sports in India, in whatever way, 12, 13, you pull her out of school for whatever reason, or 14, and say, nahi khelna hai, you will not become a sporting nation. You have to have that 50% participating. And then they go on to become your anchors and your crew and your journalists. And, we've had some magnificent sports journalists who are women. Yeah. So I think that's really the way to go.
Abhinav, what do you think about women athletes? Is there been a lot of encouragement now with women athletes? Because, what we are seeing in the last few years, especially, for example, PV Sindhu, we've seen Saina Nehwal, there's a lot of recognition that the country is giving them, and I think that's great. Is that going to happen more than what is due?
Well, firstly, just like to everybody's knowledge, I think the Paris 2024 games will be an Olympic Games with 100% gender equality, so the same amount of men and same amount of women, same amount of events as well for both men and women. We're almost there at Tokyo already, so it's just maybe a percentage difference, but will be achieved in Paris. So the Olympic world is really showing the way in gender equality. And of course, I think I agree with Ayaz that, you have to give the girls of India an equal amount of chance to play sport. But I think I'd just like to make a bigger point here. And that is, if we really want to work towards becoming a sporting nation, we sometimes just get so fascinated by just winning medals and winning championships. We have to really go a step below. And we have to set a foundation which we do not still have. And we do not still have a culture of sport in this country. And to achieve that culture of sport, we need to give more people, more young boys and girls, an opportunity to just go out and play. And just go out and play not to win medals or not to win championships, but just go out to play for the sheer joy of playing sport and for learning and imbibing the values that sport teaches you. We are a young society, and the society needs to be driven in such a way, in a particular way. And I think sport has a unique power to imbibe in fantastic values. In sport, you learn how to win, but more importantly, you learn how to lose. You learn how to follow the rules. You learn the importance of integrity. You need to have a goal. You need to work hard. You need to persevere. And these are great life lessons that our young society, and we have a very young society, can imbibe through sport. So when we do give this opportunity to our young citizens to just play sport for the sheer joy of playing sport, winning medals and winning championships and winning cricket tournaments will become a byproduct of this movement. we really need to actively work to create a culture of sport. And if we don't do that dynamically, and we just hope that it will happen through just performances on the field of play, that is just not going to be enough. We just have to create a movement, and we just have to give an opportunity for our young people to play sport and imbibe values through sport.
That's very
that last point is incredibly important, actually, and I would just wholeheartedly agree, which is, the best economies, the best societies will see the value of sport, not just economically, but in terms of its cultural impact.
Yeah.
And Abhinav is 100% right, which is, if the IPL has done anything that I'm proud of, it's that it's actually created a generation of young modern Indians that grow up, that believe participation in sport can be rewarding. Participation in sport is good for their fitness. And if there's one thing Virat Kohli's done for modern India, it's highlighted the impact of, physical well-being, and made that an aspirational objective for young Indians. And if we can make that, if we can do what Abhinav just said, which is make sport part of our culture, that just has profound impacts on society. And that's where, by the way, the regulators and the government has to come to the fore as well. Sports bodies and sports athletes and sports owners themselves can do so much, but this is where the responsibility of the regulators becomes very, very important.
So it's just my last section now, Manoj. I'm wary of the fact that you have to leave in a couple of minutes. So I'll just jump onto this. This is moving away from pure sports to something more relevant to, I think, three of you on this panel, which is books. And Sanjog, I'm sure if you're writing something quietly, please let me know. Otherwise, we can always write one together. But since Manoj has to leave, he's got another meeting. Manoj, talk to us about the book that you've just written with Simon Hughes, A New Innings, which focuses on the IPL, the reinvention of cricket, and talks a lot about technology, which is your space. What inspired you to write this book, and any key takeaways that would benefit us?
I think two or three things. Firstly, to call it a book is probably an overstatement. It's really just a collection of observations of 12 years of being involved with the IPL. And I think we try and focus on three or four things. One is our learnings about how you design a sports league optimally. The second is, how do you create value through a sporting franchise? The third is this theme of the importance of regulation. And the fourth is this important theme of the importance of technology and innovation. In truth, the book actually began many, many years ago as a cathartic experience to help me sleep at night and deal with the controversies that we seem to roll from one year to the next on. And, as much as I love Ayaz and journalists, you don't always get the opportunity to put your side of the facts, particularly when controversies are significant ones, are big ones. And I just wanted to keep my own record of the facts. And so that's how it started. It started sort of 7 or 8 years ago. And then when my business partner read it, he said, "This is just awful. This is like a diary of a loser. Write something with a bit more purpose." And so I tried to do that around this. I Googled the business of sport, and the only things I could find were either relatively egocentric tales of baseball owners and NFL owners and how much money they'd made, or books on hospitality management. And it seemed to me no one had actually written a book on the business of cricket and unpacked the business of sport. And at a time when there was more and more investment capital coming into sport, it felt like a good time to do it. So my hope is that anyone that reads it, gets something out of it in terms of understanding what is quite opaque, which is the business and the regulation of sport.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you for your time, Manoj.
Not at all, and thank you to everyone. Apologies, I have a board meeting now, but thank you to the other panelists. I learned a lot today, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Manoj.
Let me jump to you, Abhinav. Your book. In fact, I have it actually on my desk. You won't believe it, but it's been here for almost 3 years.
But have you read it?
I have read it 3 times. I have read it 3 times at 3 different low points in my life, and I must tell you, from the low point of your shooting career in Athens in 2004 to getting back on track in 2006 with the World Championship, and to winning the Olympics in 2008, right? you gave India a new chapter in sports history. And your journey has been remarkable. I mean, with the ups and downs that I've read in this book. It's a very special book for me. And, it's been there on my desk for a very long time. And I proudly hold up, this in front of my friends when they come, and I tell them, that you must have a copy of this book. And let me just tell you, the audience, this is not paid promotion by Abhinav. This is my personal view. But what I want to understand is that, I do want my desk to proudly hold a lot more such autobiographies, coming from achievers from India, who've made a dent in the world. What's keeping us to produce more Abhinav Bindras?
I don't know. I mean, I think again, it comes to a lot of development at the grassroots level. I think just setting a strong foundation for young people, I think is critically important. And I again go back to creating that culture and getting more people to play. I mean, we're a population of 1.3 odd billion, but how many of these 1 odd billion actually play sport? And how many people actually play sport to make a career out of a career in sport? It should be a very, very small number. And we do need to make sure that number increases. I think we need to make sure that we leverage a lot on science and technology and data. STEAM, I like to call it STEAM. So science, technology, engineering, analytics, and medicine to develop our athletes. And I think that needs to start at the grassroots level. And if we manage to do that, I think we will have more people coming through. We are slowly seeing the signs of that happening, and we have a lot more athletes now going into Tokyo who have an absolute realistic chance of coming home with gold medals. So I think there are definite positive signs, but I think we're all in a hurry, and we have big aspirations, and I think we must do enough at the grassroots level if we want to meet that aspiration. But just going back to the book, when I wrote the book, the idea about writing the book was to really talk about vulnerabilities. And sometimes when you're an athlete, I think there is such a big misconception surrounding athletes, that athletes are superhuman beings, and but at the end of the day, we are as human as anybody else. My story was of an absolutely ordinary person who just worked hard and had plenty of limitations, but just persevered and tried to overcome limitations every single day. And I think that is what I wanted to really truthfully put out in the book, because I think that would give the best chance for other people to maybe resonate with it and maybe find a little bit of inspiration through it, and that was the idea of doing the book. And thank you for your kind words on the book.
No, it's an excellent book. And can we hope to see the film based on your book very soon?
Yes, I think the film will be, of course, a very loosely adapted version of my book. So if you want to know my real pure story, read the book. If you want a little bit of entertainment attached with my story, then go see the film. I ideally do both, but I get them as well. I think my sport is one which is hard to show on a visual medium. It's such an internal battle, and there are challenges attached to it, and they will have to take a certain degree of creative freedom there. And I'm absolutely all right with it as long as the spirit of my journey remains true. And it helps inspire more young people to take up sport.
Thank you. Ayaz, coming back to you, I've read a lot of your books, and in January I saw this article which spoke about you co-writing something with Ravi about his cricketing journey. Tell us a bit about it, and when can I finally have the signed copy from you in my hands?
Well, to be honest, I mean, Ravi's book is it's not a book about Ravi Shastri so much as it is about players and personalities that he's dealt with, former players like Richie Benoit, commentators, current players he's played against. So it's really his impressions about those guys who he has interacted with over the last 40 years since he got into international cricket. So in that sense, I'm a glorified stenographer. So it's, but I'm also working on the book. I thought that I'll, which is and Sanjog knows about it because I've discussed this with him once, which is on the inflection points in Indian cricket history from 1947, since we became, an independent nation. So it's And I've dived into newspaper archives, magazines, digital platforms as much as I could. And then you suddenly find it's such a huge ocean that what you want to pick out is either not sufficient or you're incapable of doing it, because there's only so much time. And pandemic didn't help. But I think I'm closer to finishing that than Ravi's thing. So hopefully by June, July, it's not a book written by me. It's all articles by various people. Of course, I've got a massive introduction to it.
Yeah.
And, I'm just trying to highlight all the major things that have happened in Indian cricket from 47 to now.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. Sanjog, next time we'll have a book to talk about for you as well. But I'll have the
I don't have as interesting a story as Abhinav does, or for that matter, have the patience that Ayaz has. So
I have a last question for you.
He's the story maker. We are the storytellers.
Exactly.
Abhinav, of course, is a massive story maker. So
Sanjog, the last question is to you, and I'll get the closing remarks as well. Manoj spoke about the role of technology and how it's going to change the experience of sports in the near future. On the broadcasting side, we're seeing competition coming in from other quarters. Digital players like Facebook, which broadcasted the La Liga last year, and they saw some huge viewership. Then applications like the Fan Court from Dream 11 sponsored and broadcasted in a couple of T10 leagues, right? Of course, they were not marquee events, but is this indicating a new trend? Because with the emergence of OTT platforms, there's been a lot of talk about direct-to-consumer sports broadcasting. For a heavyweight like Star Sports, is this trend worrying, or do you have the bandwidth to adapt and still lead the distribution of live sports?
So I think there are two questions in there, Gaurav, and I'll quickly address both. One, I think all of us now operate in the attention economy. So everyone's basically trying to get a share of the consumer's attention. And whether it's OTT platforms, whether it's fan engagement platforms, whether it's broadcast, everyone's basically trying to expand the share of consumers' attention that we have. Ultimately, that is what we are after, and that is what we hold ourselves to as the eventual outcome. As far as Star specifically is concerned, we believe that we are in the business of serving sports fans. And as far as the screen is concerned, it is just a medium or a platform of engaging with the fan. So our approach is a consumer-first approach. We have Disney Plus Hotstar, which is our OTT platform, which streams live cricket and other sports, including football, kabaddi, etc. Yeah. And we have Star Sports, which is the television network. We believe digital platform enables us to talk to consumers or engage with consumers who we may not be able to engage with on account of two reasons. One, they may be not in front of a TV screen at a particular point in time, and thus would prefer to engage on the mobile screen. Or they may be in parts of the country where perhaps access to data allows them to watch sports, but they don't have access to a TV screen. It also allows us to engage with fans differently because it layers on interactivity beyond the broadcast. So I think both in terms of reaching new fans and engaging with fans differently, we actually see the digital screen as an enabler rather than a competitor to the TV screen. And I think at least our approach has been that a combination of TV and digital is the best way of reaching consumers in this country, because don't forget, TV in this country is still significantly larger in its reach, in its access, and continues to grow. So, there is no way for any sport to have the kind of scale of audience that it should have without TV being a part of the mix. So it's really a consumer first approach instead of a digital versus TV approach.
Okay. Just one final remark from, I think, all three of you. The future of sports, what are we expecting in the next couple of years with what we have seen? Abhinav, you want to go first?
Yes, I think, of course, it's been a difficult time, but I think sport will survive. The times of purely profit-driven shareholder capitalism times are over. purpose will be the essential for success of any business or any company. And here is our opportunity. I think with values of sport, we have such a purpose. In this way, I think sport can really join purpose with purpose-driven businesses to maximize not profit, but maximize value to society. And I think that should be the real motivation. And if you're able to do that, I think the business of sport will survive, but also the true ethos and the true meaning of sport will also continue to do good to society.
Yes.
Well, I'll contextualize what Abhinav has got a, global universal sweep, but I'll say in the Indian context, I think we're on the cusp of an action in sports, if it is managed well, and that's a caveat I must put in. I think that it's obviously linked to how we do economically as a country, but it's also linked to how we do socially or societally as a country. And there is now huge aspiration. Sport is, everybody acknowledges it's a soft power of a country. There's livelihood available, there's fame, there's name, but more than that, I think there's a sense of pride of some kind of achievement if I'm participating in sports, even if it is peripheral. I cannot ever become an Abhinav Bindra, but if I'm party to his journey, that in itself is so fulfilling. So that kind of awakening has happened in India. The mindset has changed. People are seeing, when we were growing up, either you took a job somewhere and forget about sports. But now, if you get a job in sports, you're seen as privileged, which is what Manoj Badale mentioned earlier. I think that's the big thing. But as I mentioned, this has to be handled well, tackled well to reach our objectives of becoming a sporting nation.
Sanjog, final word.
This is a tough one, Gaurav. I think there is the future for sport that I would love to see over the next 3 to 5 years is for every sport in this country to find its fans. Because at the core of the success and long-term sustainability of any sport, or the growth of sport in this country, because as Abhinav would probably testify, today's fan is potentially tomorrow's athlete. And today's amateur athlete is tomorrow's Olympic medal winner. And I think stories of inspiration such as Abhinav's own, as well as Ayaz said, stories of triumphs, stories of come from behind wins, stories of overcoming all kinds of odds, need to reach the people who are interested in them. And if there is a future that I would wish for sport, it would be that Ayaz has already referred to the system and the handlers of sport actually enabling sport to reach its fans. And I think if we can have a future where instead of 1, 2, or 3 sports, 15, 20, 25 sports actually find their fans, and those fans are out there. It's just that they're constrained by the fact that sport till recently has been location based. And there have been too many points of friction between sport being organized in a certain venue and sport actually reaching the fans of that sport who may be thousands of kilometers away. If I could wish for a future, I would wish for a future where in a digitized economy, we actually have sport reaching its fans. And if we can have that for more and more sports, we will truly be on our way to becoming a multi-sport nation and having this culture of sport that Abhinav so passionately spoke of.
Thank you. On that very positive note, thank you, gentlemen, for your time. I think it was a very wonderful and informative session. And I'm sure the young brigade from LSE and many others who have joined us from around the world will be very pleased with the thoughts you've shared. I'll now pass it on to Ahan, who will take some of the questions. We're about 15 minutes away from the closing. So whatever number of questions that we can answer, we'll try that. Ahan, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Bharavani, and to all of our panelists for an absolutely insightful discussion. I'll now be asking some of the questions that we've got from the audience. So the first question we've got is a general question to all of you on the panel, and it's about esports. So we've got a question from Amir Hamza saying, how do you feel about endorsing esports as even after the constraints of any future pandemic, esports can be played at the same pace? I think you're on mute.
Well, you want me to go first?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, I think we have to come to terms with the fact that esport is here and esports is here to stay. I think in the world, the world of sport is also changing, and the consumption of sport in today's youth is also changing, and esport is becoming a very important part and parcel of what they do. I think the important thing, if it has to come get say an Olympic status or so, and there is a lot of discussion and talk around it, I think it has to do with a lot to do with the values associated with the games in esports. I think a lot of esport games have a lot of violence and discrimination attached to it, and I think that is a complete no-no to in order to come into the Olympic movement. There is also a lot of talk about the esport, the gamers are not physically active or physically fit, and they do not give enough of sport is always associated with physical well-being and all of that. But if you talk to a gamer, they'll really shoot back at you, because they do actually do a lot of physical work as well in order to maximize their performance. So I think the values is something which is very interesting. But I think going forward, I think for lesser known sports, I think it is also a medium to reach out to these fans, what Sanjog just talked very nicely about. And I think a lot of sports have already started an e-version, sports version of their events and of their sports. And necessarily now the idea behind is to get that fan base, to create that fan base, and to increase the presence of that sport, and hopefully that will eventually draw more people to follow the real action and also get involved in real sport more. But I think just to conclude my remarks on this, esports is here to stay, and we just have to accept it. And some people are fans of it, some people are yet to become fans of it, but I think it's a matter of really accepting that it is here to stay.
I'll just add to.
Are you a fan of it yourself?
I'm neutral at the moment.
Sanjog, yourself?
Yeah. So I think there needs to be a definition of what esports is, and I think that's what Abhinav was actually alluding to briefly in his comments. I think there is a lot of gaming out there, and what distinguishes gaming from esports is something that needs to be defined, because all kinds of gaming can't be treated as esports. And Abhinav already articulated his concerns around gaming being equated with esports in some sense, because at the end of the day, sport stands for certain values. And if we don't see those values being represented in esports, then it's difficult to imagine why it should qualify as being a sport. So I think there is a need for us to define or distinguish between gaming and esports, firstly. And then to really define the framework for what will qualify as a sport to be an esport, instead of just being a game that is being played competitively, right? So I think there are three categories here. There's casual gaming, there's competitive gaming, and then there's esports. And there needs to be a charter for what esports has to be, just the way that there is a charter for almost every sport that is played.
Ayaz, you have a point?
Yes, I have a point. I think what we are heading for is a massive clash, actually, in mindset in the 21st century, because technology is driving our lives. It's no longer comfortable to say that whatever happens through technology is not sport. I think what is happening is that esports and gaming, etc., they are trying to, or that lobby is trying to get into becoming mainstream, or at least become part of mainstream. And therefore, this is going to be, it's almost like a clash of civilizations, if I might use a kind of popular. So I think this is where we are headed. But, I share the concerns which Abhinav has mentioned, and also the kind of broad parameters that Sanjog has articulated. And if you ask my position, I'll sidle up to Abhinav and sit there as a neutral right now.
Okay,
to Ayaz, I think what COVID has taught all of us is the need to learn to coexist. And I think
that's a very fair point.
That's true. That's true.
Yes, let's take the next question, Ahan.
Yeah, so the next question we have is one that's for Mr. Gupta, and it says that from a channel's point of view, what is the difference in the level of interest between cricket and other sports in India, and what is the strategy that Star as a company is using for other sports in terms of increasing their exposure to the audience?
Interesting. So, look, I don't think there can be a comparison made between cricket and any other sport in the country, and that is, on account of years and years of development, both commercial and otherwise in cricket, where cricket now sits almost in a different category. So the way to really look at the sports category or the sports industry in India is to look at cricket separately and look at other sports as a different portfolio of sports. When we started our journey in sports in 2012, we were very clear that we wanted to move with the purpose of being a multi-sport broadcaster, because we believed in the future of India as a multi-sport nation, as Abhinav articulated earlier. We've made significant investments in football, in kabaddi, in really trying to revitalize or bring back a traditional sport that had lost its, or not lost its roots entirely, but at least was not in the sort of frame of popular recall. We continue to invest in hockey. We continue to invest in multiple sports. So as far as a network or a broadcaster is concerned, we are committed to investing in sports beyond cricket, primarily football and kabaddi as the two sports that we've made most significant investments in over the last 6 years. And that's a journey that we're already on. There have been giant strides. There are pockets of passion for these sports now in the country, where the passion for these sports is actually more than cricket. So for example, in a state like Kerala or in a state like West Bengal, the popularity of the Hero ISL is actually rivaling that of cricket. We see Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, Karnataka and Maharashtra, watching a lot of kabaddi, and in fact, at times watching more kabaddi than cricket. So we are seeing pockets of passion emerge, and we are seeing green shoots for some of these sports to start reaching a scale where they become commercially viable. But it's a long journey. As Ayaz put it, there is investment flowing into the industry and across multiple sports. But I concur with Abhinav. I think each sport almost needs to define its purpose and also understand where it is really in terms of the life cycle that each sport has, and acknowledge those realities and move from there to really chart its growth, its path for growth. We, as I said, as a broadcaster, we are committed to building a multi-sport nation where the popularity of sports beyond cricket continues to grow.
Thank you. Yes, let's take the next one.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question is for Mr. Bindra, and it says, how has the infrastructure and support and budget allocation changed for athletes in the last 5 to 10 years?
It has changed for the good. I think there's a lot more investment coming into sport. I think even governments take sport much more seriously, just because we have a very young demographic, and it makes sense, and sport is important to this young population. So I think they have to keep this demographic happy, and because sport is an important thing, part and parcel of this demographic, I think sport is slowly getting prioritized, and I think that is wonderful to see. There is much more money flowing into sport, at least from a governmental level. Yet to infiltrate more investments to infiltrate, at least in the Olympic world, from the corporate world. There is some. I think there are certain challenges, and I think one of the biggest challenges there is governance in sport in India. And until the time we don't fix that problem, or at least take some important strides to get global best practice in governance. I think corporate support will always be less and minimal, and there'll only be a little bit of few pockets of people who are passionate about a certain sport, investing in a certain sport and things like that. But there's a lot of untapped potential. But I think things are changing, and things are changing for the good. Like Ayaz had put it, I think the next decade will be a decade for sport in this country. And I think everybody responsible and everybody attached to sport has a very important responsibility, and everybody has to play that part well for us to again meet our aspirations. But again, even as citizens, each of one who's listening today, or each member of our country can contribute to the development of sport. And it's not just about contributing economically. Each citizen of this country can contribute by just going and watching sport. And I think that is a great contribution that the people of India can make. I grew up in a generation, you were talking about earlier on in this discussion where, you played in empty stadiums and how difficult it was for athletes. I played in an empty arena for 22 years of my sports career. There was not one person who came and watched me when I competed in this country. And then I suddenly had to go to an Olympic Games and to compete in an Olympic final with 15,000 spectators. It was pretty overwhelming. So again, everybody has a contribution to make, and I think each citizen has a responsibility and can contribute by just going and watching sports. So when there's the next district competition or a club competition happening in your vicinity, just go out there and watch. It'll be a meaningful contribution towards the development of athletes and the development of sport.
That's lovely, Abhinav. Thank you. Han, we can take one last question. I know there's a lot of questions in the box, but I think we're just on time. So just take one last question and we
Sure. So this one is specifically aimed at Mr. Memon, but I think the panel at large can answer it as well. So the question is, whilst cricket remains a hugely popular sport in the subcontinent, a lot has been discussed about cricket's popularity in other nations and smaller cricket playing countries. What do you think can be done to promote cricket worldwide? And is the current T20 league model the best way forward? Or is there some other way that cricket can be grown around the world?
Right. This is right up my alley. I think this is something that, the BCCI needs to take cognizance of, it's the richest, the most powerful. And I don't mean that, these are all cliches. It's not just about the money or the power, but the vantage situation that Indian cricket finds itself in today. And if you don't expand the footprint of cricket, then you're failing in a responsibility which is implied. Nobody needs to thrust that responsibility on you. But right now, I think the need is for expansion of the footprint of cricket. I think India needs to be in the vanguard. It can't be any other country. They don't have the wherewithal. We have the wherewithal. We need to have the imagination and the commitment. I think that's really important. And if you ask me what can take the agenda forward, the gospel of cricket forward, is obviously T20 cricket, because, even to get into the Olympics, just to kind of highlight, the Indian Cricket Board was the most reluctant. There have been suggestions made by Australian cricketers, the Australian Cricket Board, and some of the others, but the BCCI was rigid, and so was, let me be honest, also England. They don't want to lose control of the events that they already have and say, Olympics mein jayega to dilute ho jayega. I think that we need to open up the windows of our minds. T20 is the way forward. It can be accommodated in the Olympic scenario. No other format can be. So that's the route to take.
Well, I think just to add to this, I think to all you cricket fans, and I know that there are lots listening in today, 2032, Brisbane becoming the front runner of sorts to host the games, and with the host country having the capability and the capacity to choose 5 events of their own, cricket may well be there.
May well be, yes. Yes. Yeah.
Extremely positive. Great. So, gentlemen, thank you for your time. We just bang on time, so thank you so much for the time you've taken today to join us. I'm sure everybody's loved the session, and we're going to get some amazing feedback now, and which I'm going to share with you later. But thank you so much, and on behalf of, I think, the LSE India Forum team, I'd like to say a very good night to all of you. Do you want to add anything, Ahan? And we can just say goodbye to the panelists and also to the listeners.
Yeah, just wanted to echo your thoughts. So thank you to all of you for taking your time out of your schedules and being here with us today. I think a lot of people who tuned in have found this discussion really insightful, and they've grown the understanding of not only cricket but a lot of sports around the world, as well as what India can hope to achieve maybe in the Olympics in the future, and how the pandemic is going to shape the future of sports. So thank you once again, and thank you Gaurav as well for hosting this so nicely.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.